Welcome to U.S. Media Power.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro arrived in the United States to face federal criminal charges after a dramatic and fast-moving sequence of events in Venezuela's capital Caracas, where residents reported explosions, heightened military activity, and disruptions to normal life. The development was followed by public remarks from U.S. President Donald Trump, who said the United States would temporarily run Venezuela and assume control over the country's oil reserves during what he described as a transitional period. U.S. officials confirmed that Maduro was taken into federal custody upon arrival and would be presented before a U.S. court under indictments that have been on file for several years. The Department of Justice said the charges include allegations related to narcotics trafficking and associated conspiracies, and that the case would proceed under established federal criminal procedures. Officials emphasized that the legal process would follow standard judicial protocols. The arrival came after reports from Caracas of loud explosions heard in multiple neighborhoods, visible security deployments, road closures, and intermittent interruptions to telecommunications services. Venezuelan state media acknowledged disturbances, but did not initially confirm Maduro's location. Independent verification inside the country remained limited during the early hours following the reports. The White House confirmed that U.S. agencies coordinated the transfer of Maduro into American jurisdiction. Officials declined to provide specific operational details, citing security considerations, but stated that the action was taken to enforce existing criminal charges approved by U.S. courts. No immediate timeline was announced for Maduro's initial court appearance. In public remarks, President Trump said the United States would oversee Venezuela during a transitional phase. He stated that American authorities would manage Venezuela's oil reserves and energy production, describing the move as temporary. Trump did not issue a formal executive order outlining the governance framework, and no written policy document detailing the scope or duration of U.S. oversight was released at that time. In Caracas, Venezuelan officials issued statements disputing the U.S. account. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said reports that Maduro had arrived in the United States were false and demanded proof of his whereabouts. She said the Venezuelan government remained functional and in control of state institutions. No live public appearance by Maduro was broadcast on Venezuelan state television during the initial reporting period. U.S. officials reiterated that Maduro was in federal custody. The Department of Justice referenced previously unsealed indictments and confirmed that federal prosecutors were prepared to proceed. Court officials said security arrangements were being made for proceedings due to the high-profile nature of the case. The Pentagon confirmed that U.S. military forces were involved in operations connected to the situation, but declined to disclose details regarding troop movements or specific activities. Defense officials said their focus was on the safety of U.S. personnel and maintaining regional stability. No casualty figures were released. The U.S. Department of State said diplomatic engagement with regional governments was ongoing. Officials confirmed that allies in Latin America and Europe were being briefed on developments. The statement emphasized that U.S. actions were being conducted under domestic law and that coordination with international partners was continuing. Oil markets reacted with volatility as traders assessed the implications of possible changes in control over Venezuela's energy sector. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, though production has declined significantly in recent years due to sanctions, infrastructure deterioration, and economic instability. Energy analysts said any shift in operational control could affect global supply dynamics. Within Venezuela, residents reported the presence of security forces near government buildings and infrastructure sites. Some areas experienced temporary movement restrictions and checkpoints. Telecommunications providers acknowledged service interruptions earlier in the day, followed by partial restoration later. The state oil company PDVSA did not issue an immediate public statement regarding operational authority. Workers at several facilities said they were awaiting instructions. No official changes to export procedures or production schedules were announced. At the United Nations, officials said the organization was monitoring developments closely. A spokesperson called for restraint and respect for international law and urged all parties to avoid actions that could harm civilians. No Emergency Security Council meeting was announced during the initial phase of reporting. In Washington, members of Congress requested briefings from the administration. Lawmakers said they sought clarification regarding the legal basis for U.S. actions and the scope of any proposed control over Venezuelan assets. Congressional leaders indicated that oversight hearings were likely. The Treasury Department confirmed that existing sanctions on Venezuela remained in effect unless formally revised. Officials said no immediate changes to licensing or enforcement had been announced. Financial institutions monitored guidance related to Venezuelan assets and transactions. Federal court officials said preparations were underway for Maduro's initial appearance, including advisement of charges and determinations regarding pretrial custody. Prosecutors declined to comment on potential trial timelines, citing the early stage of proceedings. International airlines and shipping companies reviewed advisories related to Venezuela. Some carriers adjusted schedules while monitoring security conditions. Maritime operators cited uncertainty surrounding port access and export authorizations. President Trump reiterated that U.S. oversight of Venezuela would be temporary and would remain in place until a transition was completed. He did not specify a timetable or identify transitional authorities. By the end of the reporting period, no independent visual confirmation of Maduro's location had been released publicly. U.S. officials maintained that he was in custody, while Venezuelan officials continued to dispute that claim. Federal law enforcement officials said that upon arrival in the United States, Maduro was transferred into the custody of the U.S. Marshals Service. Officials confirmed that detention procedures followed standard federal protocols for high-profile defendants. Security around the detention facility was increased, and access was restricted as preparations continued for initial court proceedings. Court officials confirmed that the case would be handled in a federal district court with jurisdiction over international narcotics cases. The indictments referenced by prosecutors were originally announced several years earlier and include allegations related to international drug trafficking networks. Prosecutors said the charges remained active and legally enforceable. The Department of Justice stated that Maduro would be afforded all rights guaranteed under U.S. law, including access to legal counsel and due process. Officials declined to comment on whether Maduro had retained attorneys or whether public defenders would be appointed. U.S. officials said the transfer into American custody was coordinated among multiple agencies, including the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security. Officials emphasized that the operation complied with domestic legal authorities. In Venezuela, uncertainty persisted as state institutions continued to issue statements asserting continuity of governance. Government ministries released brief communications indicating that administrative functions remained operational. No official confirmation of a transfer of authority was announced inside the country. State-aligned media outlets continued broadcasting programming asserting that Maduro remained president. However, no live public address by Maduro was shown during the reporting period. Opposition figures cited international reporting indicating that Maduro was no longer in the country. Security forces remained deployed near key infrastructure locations in Caracas, including government buildings and transportation corridors. Residents described a visible security presence and limited movement in some areas. No nationwide curfew was announced. The Venezuelan armed forces issued brief statements emphasizing loyalty to the Constitution and public order. No unified address from senior military leadership was broadcast. Analysts noted the absence of a comprehensive military briefing. The U.S. Department of State said embassies and diplomatic missions in the region were coordinating with host governments. Officials confirmed that emergency consultations were taking place with regional partners. Several Latin American governments released statements calling for restraint and dialogue. Some leaders expressed concern over sovereignty and regional stability. Others cited accountability and legal proceedings as priorities. The Organization of American States acknowledged the situation and said it was reviewing developments. No emergency session was announced during the initial reporting window. At the United Nations, diplomats continued informal consultations. A spokesperson reiterated calls for respect for international law and the protection of civilians. Humanitarian agencies said they were monitoring potential impacts on access to food, medicine, and essential services. In Washington, congressional committees began requesting classified briefings. Lawmakers said they sought details on the legal basis for U.S. actions, the scope of involvement in Venezuela, and any plans related to governance or energy management. Some lawmakers raised questions about oversight and long-term implications. Others emphasized the importance of judicial proceedings and legal accountability. No formal resolutions were introduced during the reporting period. The Treasury Department said sanctions enforcement remained unchanged. Officials confirmed that existing restrictions on Venezuelan entities and individuals continue to apply unless modified through formal processes. Financial institutions monitored guidance regarding Venezuelan assets. Energy markets continued reacting to statements regarding oil reserves. Analysts noted that Venezuela's production capacity remains limited due to infrastructure challenges and sanctions. Any increase in output would require significant investment and time, according to industry assessments. Shipping and logistics companies reviewed advisories related to Venezuelan ports. Some operators reported delays and uncertainties surrounding export authorizations. Insurance providers assessed risk conditions. Airlines adjusted flight schedules to and from Venezuela as a precaution. Some carriers cited safety assessments and coordination with aviation authorities. Within the United States, legal experts noted that the case marked a rare instance of a sitting foreign leader being brought before U.S. courts. Court filings indicated that prosecutors were preparing for complex proceedings involving international evidence and witnesses. Federal judges involved in pretrial administration said hearings would proceed according to standard procedures. Court security officials confirmed enhanced measures due to the profile of the defendant. The White House said additional announcements would be made as developments progressed. Officials emphasized that no final decisions regarding Venezuela's governance structure had been publicly issued. President Trump reiterated in later remarks that U.S. oversight would be temporary. He stated that American involvement would continue until a transition was completed. He did not identify specific benchmarks or timelines. Inside Venezuela, public services continued operating, though reports of localized disruptions persisted. Utility providers said they were addressing intermittent outages. No nationwide service shutdowns were confirmed. International humanitarian organizations said they were assessing conditions on the ground. Aid groups emphasized the importance of maintaining access to essential supplies. As the day progressed, governments and institutions continued issuing updates. Diplomatic channels remained active. Markets continued monitoring statements from U.S. officials. By the close of the reporting period, U.S. authorities maintained that Maduro remained in federal custody. Venezuelan officials continued to dispute that assertion. No independent visual confirmation had been released. Officials on both sides said further information would be provided as events developed. This report reflects confirmed statements and developments regarding the arrival of Nicolás Maduro in the United States, federal criminal proceedings, and comments by President Donald Trump concerning Venezuela's governance and oil reserves. The situation remains ongoing and further official updates are expected.